This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, brought to you by Goldrock Capital. Each week, we look at how high net worth families can improve their lives, decisions, and investments in a deeply uncertain world. We always aim to provide practical information, even if we can't offer specific investment advice.
Welcome to the Definitely Uncertain podcast by Goldrock Capital. My name is David Ram, and I'm a partner at Goldrock Capital, the more than 20-year-old multifamily office servicing high net worth investors in Israel and around the world. And with me today is Dan Altschuler Malek, managing partner at Unovis Asset Management, an investment company focused on the future of food. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, David. It's great to be here.
Good to see you. And in terms of your focus and your background, love to hear a bit more about yourself and about your personal story.
Sure. Happy to do so. Start with myself, then I'll talk a little bit about Unovis. Born and raised in Mexico City, I've been in the food industry for the better part of 20 years in different ways. I started off in corporate banking and was looking at different food multinationals from a credit perspective. I managed a small logistics company in Mexico City with some CPG and food service clients. I moved to the US and I launched a line of natural snacks circa 2003, 2004. Learned a lot about that. I also had a small restaurant in the Lower East Side in New York City, which was an amazing experience. And I also managed a creative agency in New York with a lot of food service and some CPG brands. After those experiences, I wanted to do something that combined my knowledge of the food industry, something that involved technology and how things were changing to do it better. And I also wanted it to have an impact on the world. And as I was exploring what was happening in the world, I came across the world of alternative proteins, and it just blew my mind. And through finding ways into the path, I ended up joining alongside Chris Kerr. And for the past 5+ years, I've been doing early stage investments in companies developing direct replacements to animal food products. Our first fund, called New Crop Capital, deployed about $50 million into 42 companies around the world, primarily in the US, Europe, and Israel, but some outliers in China, in India, New Zealand, and in Mexico.
Wow.
And these companies were developing replacements to animal proteins using plant-based proteins, using fermentation, and using cultivated, sometimes known as cellular or lab-grown meats. So it's a wonderful time in the industry, and I could just keep going on and on and on, but I assume you have some particular questions.
No, that was a great intro. And I love the fact that you come from the traditional food industry, even a restaurant on the Lower East Side. I think that's a great story and a great background to get into that world. So when it comes to our podcasts and conversations we have, and as investment advisors, we sometimes like to take a deep dive into a market where we particularly see a secular trend. And in particular, the future of food, and I guess even more specifically, what you're focused on, the alternative protein market, seems to be quite a strong secular trend in the positive sense. But I remember when I was a kid, and I used to go, I just thought about this now, but I remember when I was a kid, I used to eat all the time these things called Morningstar Farms veggie burgers. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. So they've been around forever. So when you talk about innovation, when you talk about new products, what's been missing in the market? Because I remember, 35 years ago, this stuff was in the freezer section of the supermarket.
Yeah, I think the industry has gone a long way. Obviously, there are the initial companies, the Morningstars of the world, the Tofurkeys, that when I think back of what the mountains that they climbed in terms of presenting these types of products to consumers and actually getting retailers to say, okay, I'll bring you on board, my hat's off to them because they were the real pioneers. And I would say that they are probably the first generation of vegan products that went mainstream. Mm-hmm. But what's happened is that technology has made improvements in all sorts of the value chain across the board within the food industry itself. You have more and more varieties of raw material supplies. You have protein that's coming now from peas and companies that are dedicating themselves to that. You have different manufacturing of processes and technologies that can be implemented. And people have started to awaken to the need to change how we eat. Mm-hmm. If we look at the food system as a whole, the 19th and 20th century, the focus was on making more food available.
Right.
But people, out of ignorance, not malice, I think, did not recognize all the impacts that these advances in food manufacturing were having on our bodies and on the environment.
Right. Interesting.
Now we're in a time.
Yeah, that makes sense, because when I usually think of the future of food or food tech, I think a lot about having more food, but using less inputs, like less energy, less water, less land, less chemicals. And that's a lot of what the food tech market is focused on. But I guess the outcome has been scarcity in some parts of the world and abundance in other parts of the world. Maybe I'm wrong, but is that part of what the solutions that you're trying to solve as well when it comes to food tech, which is, just the imbalance of scarcity in a lot of parts of the world versus abundance? Or is that something that you're not really focused on that much?
Well, the scarcity, there's an imbalance. The amount of food that is thrown away is just such a huge amount that could probably feed a lot of the people that are undernourished in the world. We are trying to be part of many solutions of a very complex problem, which we do not think we can solve. We know we cannot solve by ourselves. But what do we want to do? We want to be able to make more protein available for people. Plant-based proteins, fermentation, it simply, it takes less inputs to create than raising a cow or raising a chicken. Mm-hmm. So just by that shift into plant-based proteins, we are able to better allocate limited resources such as land. So that is one of the reasons we're doing this. Another reason we're doing this is because the population is growing.
Yeah.
Are we going to be 9 billion in 20 or 30 years? Are we going to be 10 billion? Regardless, we're going to be a lot of people. And right now, for different reasons, countries such as India, such as China, that before did not consume a lot of animal protein, started as their economies grew. But this also can create significant challenges on the global food supply. And then we have the matter of the oceans. It's not about if plant-based or fermented or cultivated are better or not than traditional seafood. If you look at it, there are just no more fish in the oceans. Those stocks have been depleted.
Really?
So we need to start thinking of solutions for that. On top of all the damage that has been done, on top of all the health concerns that are associated with animal proteins on the sides of beef and chicken, there's strong links to different types of cancer and heart disease. On the side of food that's coming from the oceans are just polluted. That is a matter of fact. So how much plastic do people want in their bodies? I would say not that much.
Right.
So these are the type of challenges. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of how personal the relationship is between food and people. It tells us about our memories of growing up. It talks a lot about our culture, where we come from, the food that we eat. It is a very social activity. So food creates a lot of emotion in people, which I think is wonderful. And I think we need to be mindful of that as we're trying to find these different solutions.
Interesting. Yeah, because I have a friend who's involved in the food industry, agriculture, and he told me that, the shape, size, color of a certain fruit or vegetable is very different. It's a different market in different countries because there's the cultural aspects around a cherry tomato is different in various countries, or broccoli is small or big, depending on what countries you sell it in, which is very interesting on the cultural side. On the protein side, do you have I know in the energy market, for example, as a comparator, there's been a lot of discussion around the West pushing emerging markets into a corner and saying, hey, we got to stop polluting. We have to use more renewables, different sources of energy. And the emerging markets are like, I don't understand. You've had 100 years of success and wealth and creation because of hydrocarbons, and now you're telling us to stop using them. That's not fair. Is that also going to happen in the food market, where they say, hey, now we're finally getting protein demands from the emerging markets. We also want to enjoy a fresh steak. We don't want you to push on vegetable proteins on us. You guys, you eat the fermented vegetable proteins and we'll eat the steak. Is that happening in the market as well? Or is the demand for vegetable proteins also coming from the emerging markets?
So I don't think about pushing anything onto people. I think about offering them things that they're going to enjoy just because it's delicious.
Right.
If I give you an amazing fill in the blank, an amazing burger or a slice of pizza or some tacos, and you enjoy them, and after the fact, you're like, wow, that was delicious. How did you prepare that? And I say, that's actually plant-based. Do you care?
Right.
If it filled you, if it satisfied you from a culinary perspective, if the price point was one that you were in line with, if it had the nutrition that made you feel full, and you were able to enjoy it.
Right.
So, but that is the win. The win is when you can present to people things that they can enjoy and have all these other benefits. It's not about imposing. That's why we're very mindful and respectful of each culture's culinary heritage. We are not going to jump into another country and enforce Western style food and say, you need to eat this. No. Mm-hmm. We've done it in Mexico, for example, where we invested in a company called Benji Vegan that started commercializing some family recipes of vegan foods. And they're delicious. So we try to meet the consumers where they are at and just present options.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you about you mentioned the word cost for a second. And obviously this past year, the world has experienced inflation. Inflation is split in different components. A couple of the components that have been meaningfully inflated in prices have been related to energy and food. Just in Israel now, they're announcing across the board energy and food price increases, which is already quite expensive here. When you look at the future of food and you look at protein replacements, are there cost considerations also going to be addressing the problems of the constant increase in food costs to these markets? Because obviously, fruits, vegetables, and meats are different prices one to the other. And protein, what I see about protein in the market today is quite expensive, and Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger are also quite expensive. So are those things also being addressed as you guys invest and try and scale those issues to try and reduce the inflationary costs of food?
There's a lot there in that question. Let's take into account a couple of things. One, and I just heard this fabulous podcast, I don't remember, New York Times or Wall Street Journal, talking about the U.S. Cattle industry and meat industry, and this complete disconnect where the packers are making more and more money. They now four companies account for 80+% of the market, whereas the ranchers are getting squeezed. So there is this complete disconnect and imbalance, and the consumers are suffering.
Right.
So there's a lot of complex issues. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of lobbying. Look, there is a lot of government subsidies into animal proteins that I ask myself, when will those start opening up into alternatives? Not necessarily replacing them completely, but opening them up. When we are talking specifically about our companies, we have seen increases across the board, raw materials, transportation costs. Those have been expensive, very, very expensive. I am hopeful that a lot of this has to do with these very extraordinary years where COVID just completely collapsed the system, which was a system that was working very well to a certain extent, but depended on everything being, the same throughout. There was a crash, if you will, and now things are starting to happen. Our products in themselves, they can be considered more expensive than traditional animal proteins. I would say in significant part due to the scale. In food, economies of scale play a significant part. And we do see as these companies start to grow and start to manufacture more and more, the price points come down and they are becoming more and more affordable
Right.
for other people. And that is a goal. Obviously, we need to work towards that. And we're looking forward to this being a place where these products are not just on parity with animal proteins, but actually are cheaper than.
Right. And what about the human capital aspects in the market in alternative protein? I know in the farming in particular, the average age of a person working in farming is quite old, and there's not a lot of interest in the younger generation. Is that different in the alternative protein space? Is there an issue around scaling, not only on a material basis, but also on a human capital basis to get people involved in that market?
There is a lot of excitement around food innovation in general,
Mm-hmm.
be it upcycling foods, be it alternative proteins, being robotics. So I think this trend of food being an in category has brought a lot of talent. This talent is from a lot of broad ages. So I have first-time entrepreneurs who have already long professional career in other industries. You have people who are recent graduates, undergraduate or graduate school, who are starting companies. So there is a strong influx of people. And it's exciting to see. Some of them came from very different industries and are starting food alternative protein companies for ethical reasons, because they are vegans and they want to contribute to a solution. Some of them see an opportunity in the market and they say, look, we see a white space. Other are people from technical backgrounds and say, you know what, I know a lot about fermentation and I think I can create this delicious product using my knowledge. People are the most important thing. At the end of the day, when we are investing in a company, it is team first, because we're not buying shares in a company. We are investing in the and their promise of trying to do something great.
Right. Interesting. In terms of, when I look at the venture capital market, which is what, of course, you're involved in directly, and I think about market segments way beyond food, all the market segments that venture capital focuses on, I always, think about the IRR aspects or the cash on cash aspects that the venture capital guys are trying to achieve. And whenever you talk about markets that may have meaningfully larger capital requirements and more time toward success, takes a lot longer to develop those companies, it's obviously quite challenging. Are you seeing challenges? Obviously, it's quite trendy now, and there are a lot of investors focused on this market. But oftentimes, when an investor is faced with an option to either invest in the next ad tech company or in the next food company, a lot of times ad tech is a lot faster to the exit, less capital requirements, better for the investor. So is that opening up opportunities for you? Do you see challenges on capital raise, on ensuring that your companies that you're investing in, all 42 of them, have enough capital requirements to actually get to the end game? Because I can only imagine it's quite challenging to raise the money that they need to get to where they're trying to get to.
Definitely larger rounds, which are starting in Series C's and therefore require much larger checks. Thankfully, what we're seeing is that those checks are coming many times from people who are familiar with the food space, which is very helpful because it's not just the check that is needed. But at the same time, different pools of capital are starting to recognize these opportunities. But they're looking at them through a different lens. So we are getting more and more capital allocated towards this vertical. Sometimes you can get too much capital, and what that causes is valuations to rise. We are very mindful of that because we recognize that these types of companies take 7+ years, if you will, to get to a nice size. We are not expecting most companies to become unicorns. These are food companies. We recognize at the end of the day, the margins will be what they will be. These are nickel and dime businesses that depend on recurring purchases from consumers. And it takes a while. But when you get to something big, then you have a great company. So we're mindful of that. And we are seeing a lot of craziness in the markets. I think in all industries, in all asset classes, there has been just too much liquidity. Let's see how that ends.
Is regulation also, by the way, a big risk in your industry in terms of FDA or other international government bodies? Is that also a significant barrier?
I wouldn't say it's a risk. It's an understanding. You need to understand what it takes from an idea to become a demo product, to be able to be manufacturing at large scale and to be able to manufacture it at large scale.
Right.
And in each of those steps, as you are scaling up your output, you need to be mindful of the different regulations. You need to be very mindful of food safety. So the Silicon Valley break it and fix it later type mindset, I do not believe applies to food, because we have people's safety and lives in our hands. So that is my personal philosophy. I do want our companies to go at a good pace, but I want them to build something solid. And I don't believe in binary outcomes. I don't think it's either a boom or a bust situation. It's about building something that can scale. And on that, I'll also say that I do not expect most of our companies to go public. I don't think that's never been the case in food. I don't think that will change. What the exits look like, I think, will be a mix. Yes, there will be IPOs here and there, but I think there will be a lot of acquisitions by the larger players. I think there will also be some roll-ups in the future. And some companies will choose to stand by themselves, generating decent profits for their shareholders as they grow. I think that's the mix of things.
Understood. In conclusion, Dan, maybe you can just give us it's not fair to pick one favorite, but out of the 42 companies that you're invested in, the most exciting or the most interesting company that you're really bullish about in the portfolio, because obviously I think all the listeners are really excited about the future of alternative protein. Is getting more and more popular in the US for sure, in Israel as well. So what's out there that you're most excited about?
So I'll give you a couple, and let's just go throughout the day. I would say that for people having breakfast, I would suggest the plant-based chorizo from the Abbott's Butcher, alongside the vegan egg from Zero Egg, an Israeli company.
Oh, wow.
For lunch, I would say, why not try Black Sheep Foods plant-based lamb products, which are just outstanding if you like lamb especially. And then for dinner, you can have some plant-based salmon burgers from Good Catch. So there, a little bit of a variety of our companies. I would just say this is all thanks to the entrepreneurs. They go through hell and high water. They sweat blood and tears to get these companies started. And I'm very respectful of what they're doing, because they're trying to change the world to make it better for all of us.
Amazing. Well, you're doing great stuff, and it sounds like you're building a really impressive portfolio. And I appreciate you joining us today on the podcast. And I hope to hear good news about those companies in the future.
Definitely. Thank you very much, David. And thank you to your audience.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.